Have you ever noticed how some of the most revealing moments in life arrive without warning? Small, ordinary situations that seem almost too simple to matter, yet somehow leave behind a question that lingers long after the moment has passed. A glance, a hesitation, a choice made in only a few seconds can sometimes say more about the way we move through the world than long explanations ever could. There are decisions we prepare for carefully, weighing consequences, comparing possibilities, thinking through every angle. But there are also decisions that happen before language fully forms, those instant responses that rise quietly from somewhere deeper, shaped by memory, emotion, habit, values, and experiences we may not even realize are guiding us. What makes those moments fascinating is that they often bypass the version of ourselves we consciously present. Before logic arranges its arguments, instinct often reaches first, and instinct can be surprisingly honest. A simple, everyday scene can become a mirror in that way. Not because one answer defines a person, and not because a single reaction can explain an entire personality, but because certain choices often reflect which kind of vulnerability catches our attention first, which responsibility feels most urgent, or which kind of human struggle speaks most strongly to something already living inside us. Sometimes the choice we make reveals where our compassion naturally moves. Sometimes it highlights what we quietly fear. Sometimes it reflects what we believe deserves protection, even when we have never said that belief out loud. That is why exercises like this can feel strangely personal. They do not ask who you want to be. They ask what your attention reaches toward first when there is no time to construct the perfect answer. And often, that first movement tells a story. Today, the situation is very simple on the surface. No dramatic background, no impossible philosophy. Just a familiar public moment that many people have experienced or imagined before. Yet hidden inside it is a quiet test of instinct, one that may reflect something meaningful about how you weigh need, fairness, care, and responsibility. There is no perfect answer here. No answer that proves kindness more than another. But there may be something interesting in noticing which choice feels immediate to you before explanation begins. Because sometimes the first answer is not random at all. Sometimes it carries a pattern you have been living for years without fully seeing it. Imagine yourself at the end of a long day. The air inside a bus or train feels slightly heavy, filled with the quiet movement of people returning home. Each person carrying thoughts no one else can see. Outside the window, the city continues in its usual rhythm, traffic lights changing, footsteps crossing streets, distant conversations fading in and out as the vehicle moves forward. You have found a seat, perhaps after standing for some time, and for a brief moment there is stillness. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just another ordinary part of the day. Then, at the next stop, the doors open. Several people enter at once, and almost immediately you realize something important. There is no empty seat left except the one you are sitting in. In front of you now stand 4 different individuals, each carrying a different kind of visible need. One of them is a woman holding a baby, or perhaps expecting one. Her posture suggests fatigue, the kind that does not always come from one difficult hour, but from many demanding days layered together. Her attention is divided, part of her focused on balance, part of it on the small life depending on her. Next to her stands an elderly woman. Her movements are careful, measured, almost cautious, as though every shift of weight must be considered before it happens. Time is visible in the way she holds herself. Nearby, there is also a man using crutches, one leg injured, every adjustment of posture requiring effort. Even standing still appears uncomfortable, as though remaining upright asks more from him than others might immediately notice. And beside them is a blind man, holding a cane, navigating the space through touch, sound, and awareness rather than sight, adjusting carefully to a crowded environment built mostly for people who can see. 4 people. 4 very different forms of vulnerability. 4 possible reasons your attention may move toward one person before the others. The important part of this exercise is not to search for the answer that sounds most socially correct. It is not about choosing what you think others would praise. It is about noticing which person your mind moves toward first before explanation begins, before comparison becomes complicated. Because often, the first answer arrives quietly. It appears before argument, before justification, before the need to defend yourself. And that first instinct can sometimes reflect the way you naturally interpret need, whether you respond most strongly to fragility, age, pain, long-term challenge, visible effort, or something more difficult to name. So before we explore any meaning, allow yourself a moment of honesty. Do not analyze too quickly. Just notice where your attention lands first. Now pause for a moment and imagine that the decision must be made immediately. There is no extra time to compare every possibility, no chance to ask who has suffered more today, who has waited longer, or whose story is hardest. The moment is brief, and everyone around you is watching only in the way public spaces quietly watch, without speaking, but still aware that someone must act. Your hand may already be moving slightly, your body preparing to stand, but before you do, one person among the 4 has probably already drawn your attention more strongly than the others. That first reaction matters most here. Not the answer you arrive at after debate, but the one that appeared in the very first second. Was your attention pulled toward the mother carrying new responsibility and visible exhaustion? Did it move toward the elderly woman, whose age alone may suggest fragility and earned respect? Did you immediately notice the injured man, where physical pain appears direct and undeniable? Or did your focus settle on the blind man, whose challenge may not look dramatic in one instant, but extends through every environment he enters? Try not to change your answer just because another option also feels reasonable. The purpose is not to prove fairness to everyone. In truth, every option contains compassion. Every option can be defended. What makes the exercise interesting is simply noticing which kind of need your instinct identifies first. Sometimes people are surprised by their own answer. They expect themselves to choose one person, then discover their attention moved elsewhere before logic could intervene. That small surprise can be revealing. Because instinct often reaches toward the kind of struggle we unconsciously understand most deeply, whether through personal experience, values learned early in life, or quiet beliefs about who should be protected first when choices are limited. So hold your answer clearly now. Choose the person you would offer the seat to first. And once your choice feels settled, we can begin exploring what that instinct may gently suggest. Not as a fixed truth, but as one possible reflection of how you move through difficult decisions. If your attention moved first toward the mother holding a baby or toward the woman carrying new life, your instinct may reflect a sensitivity to responsibility that extends beyond what is immediately visible. Very often, people drawn to this choice are responding not only to one person, but to the sense that one vulnerable life is connected to another. Even before words form, there can be a quiet recognition that helping one person here may also protect someone who depends entirely on her balance, energy, and safety. For some people, this choice comes from a strong, protective impulse. Not dramatic protection, but a steady inner tendency to notice when someone is carrying more than they can easily show. A mother holding a child often represents more than tiredness. She can symbolize interrupted rest, divided attention, constant vigilance, and the invisible weight of caring while still needing to move through ordinary public life. That is why this choice often appears quickly. It may not be about sympathy alone. It may be about recognizing layered effort. People who choose this option sometimes have an instinctive awareness of hidden burdens. They may notice when someone looks composed on the surface, but is clearly managing more than one demand at once. In everyday life, this can appear as sensitivity toward people who continue functioning even while carrying responsibilities others do not immediately see. There is also often a future-oriented feeling inside this choice. A child naturally suggests what is still developing, what still depends on support, what has not yet become independent. Even when no one consciously thinks in those terms, the image can quietly trigger a belief that fragile beginnings deserve protection. That does not necessarily mean you always place the future above everything else, but it may suggest that when faced with limited resources, part of you naturally responds to situations where support seems likely to ripple outward. Sometimes this choice also appears in people who value emotional steadiness. A baby often introduces unpredictability, crying, sudden movement, fatigue, urgency. And some people instinctively want to reduce strain in situations where one small difficulty could quickly become much larger. At a deeper level, this response can sometimes reflect familiarity with caregiving itself. Even if you are not a parent, you may understand what it means to carry responsibility that continues whether or not you are tired. You may feel drawn toward helping people whose needs are immediate because someone else depends on them remaining stable. The strength inside this instinct is often tenderness paired with practical awareness. But every strength can also have a quieter challenge. People who respond strongly to visible caregiving roles sometimes place enormous value on helping others, while forgetting how often they themselves continue carrying things silently. They may become highly responsive to responsibility outside themselves, while dismissing their own exhaustion as less important. In some cases, they also struggle when different forms of vulnerability compete equally, because their empathy activates strongly wherever dependence is visible. This choice may also suggest that you are moved by beginnings, by anything that feels unfinished, developing, or still needing protection before it can stand fully on its own. That can become a beautiful quality in relationships, work, and daily life. It often appears in people who naturally encourage growth, support learning, protect fragile confidence, or care deeply about what small actions may become over time. You may not always describe yourself as nurturing, but your instinct may still reveal a tendency to preserve what feels delicate when the moment asks you to choose quickly. And sometimes, that simply means you notice where support may matter before others even realize help is needed. If your first instinct was to stand and offer the seat to the elderly woman, your choice may reflect a quiet sensitivity to time itself, to what a person has already carried, already endured, and already given before arriving in this present moment. For many people, age immediately changes how they read a situation. A younger person standing may look uncomfortable, but an older person standing can feel different. The body often tells a story long before words do. Slower movement, careful balance, small pauses before each step. A certain caution that suggests even ordinary motion now requires more attention than it once did. When this is the first detail your mind responds to, it can suggest that your empathy often connects with accumulated experience rather than only immediate urgency. Some people who choose this option are deeply affected by the idea that dignity matters, especially when strength becomes less visible. There can be an inner belief, sometimes learned early, sometimes formed quietly through observation, that age deserves consideration not simply because of fragility, but because every older person represents years no one else can fully see. An elderly face often carries invisible history. Work, sacrifice, losses survived, responsibilities fulfilled, changes witnessed, people remembered, and versions of the world that no longer exist. Even without consciously thinking all of this, your instinct may react to the sense that someone has already traveled a long distance through life and should not be asked to struggle unnecessarily when comfort can be offered. This choice often appears in people who naturally value continuity. You may feel connected to the idea that society is not built only by those who are active now, but also by those who carried it before. Even in small public moments, that belief can quietly influence what feels right. Sometimes this instinct also reflects personal memory. A grandparent, an older neighbor, an elder teacher, or simply repeated experiences of seeing aging up close can leave behind a strong sensitivity to what physical decline looks like in ordinary spaces. You may notice subtle details others miss: hesitation before turning, careful hand placement, the effort hidden inside maintaining balance. That attention often comes from respect, but also from awareness. There is usually patience inside this kind of choice. People drawn to this answer often understand that not all vulnerability announces itself dramatically. Sometimes weakness arrives slowly, with dignity intact, asking for nothing while still needing consideration. The strength here is often grounded compassion care expressed through acknowledgement rather than emotion alone. Yet this instinct can also carry its own challenge. Those who strongly prioritize age sometimes feel tension when modern situations move too quickly, especially when speed seems to replace patience, or novelty seems to replace depth. You may occasionally feel unsettled when experience appears undervalued, or when people overlook those whose contributions are less visible simply because they no longer move at the pace of younger lives. There may also be moments when you assume others will naturally see what you see, only to realize that not everyone interprets respect through the same lens. Still, this response often reflects something steady: a belief that care should not only move toward what is newest or loudest, but also toward what has already endured quietly. And in many areas of life, that same instinct may appear again. You may listen carefully when older voices speak, feel drawn to preserve meaning others discard, or instinctively slow down when someone vulnerable should not be rushed. Sometimes your choice reveals that what moves you most is not only visible weakness, but the simple feeling that certain people should not have to ask before kindness appears. If your attention moved first toward the man using crutches, your instinct may reflect a mind that responds quickly to immediate reality, the kind of response shaped less by symbolism and more by what appears urgent, concrete, and physically undeniable. Among all four people, this is often the option many notice because the discomfort feels direct. An injured leg suggests visible strain. The body is clearly compensating. Balance looks difficult. Every second standing appears to demand effort. For some people, that clarity matters. When need is obvious and immediate, their instinct moves toward the situation where relief seems most measurable. A seat in that moment is not abstract kindness. It is a direct reduction of pain. This often reflects a practical form of empathy. Rather than beginning with broad ideas about fairness, social meaning, or invisible circumstances, you may naturally begin by asking, who appears least able to continue standing right now? That way of seeing can be deeply compassionate, even if it looks more logical than emotional from the outside. People drawn to this choice often trust observable facts. The injury is visible. The difficulty is present now. The benefit of helping is immediate and easy to understand. There is little ambiguity. That does not mean you lack emotional depth. It may simply mean your care often moves most strongly when the need is clear enough that action can happen without hesitation. In many parts of life, this can become a powerful strength. You may be someone who remains calm when others become overwhelmed, because your attention naturally organizes itself around what can be addressed first. In situations where many people hesitate, you may move quickly because the practical next step feels obvious to you. There is often efficiency inside this instinct, not cold efficiency, but purposeful responsiveness. You may also feel uncomfortable when discussions stay too long in theory while someone nearby clearly needs immediate help. For you, action can feel more meaningful than prolonged debate. This choice sometimes appears in people who believe that fairness begins with current conditions rather than general identity. In other words, the question becomes less about who belongs to which category and more about who is struggling most in this exact second. That perspective often produces reliable decision-making, especially when circumstances are unclear and time is limited. But every instinct also has a shadow. Because practical thinking values what can be seen and measured, there are moments when invisible burdens may receive less immediate attention. Emotional strain, hidden exhaustion, or long-term difficulty can be harder to prioritize when compared with pain that presents itself clearly. This does not mean you ignore those things. It simply means your first response often follows what appears urgent in the present moment, and sometimes that can create tension when others are guided by different emotional priorities. Still, this response often reflects strong internal clarity. When something looks painful, unnecessary suffering should be reduced if possible. There is also often a quiet honesty in this choice. You may dislike pretending uncertainty when your instinct already knows where practical help would matter most. In everyday life, that same pattern may appear often. You may solve problems quickly, notice where systems fail, step in during confusion, or become the person others rely on when action matters more than discussion. Sometimes your choice suggests that what moves you most is not who someone is, but what they are enduring in the moment, directly in front of you. And that can reveal a form of care that is grounded, immediate, and deeply useful when the world becomes complicated. If your first instinct moved toward the blind man, your choice may reflect a form of empathy that often notices what others pass by too quickly, the kind of attention that responds not only to visible difficulty, but also to the deeper challenge of moving through environments that are not fully built for everyone equally. At first glance, this choice can seem quieter than the others. There is no visible injury in the dramatic sense, no sign of immediate collapse, no outward image of exhaustion as obvious as the other options may present. And yet many people feel drawn here almost immediately. That usually happens because something in them recognizes that difficulty is not always loud. A blind person standing in a moving vehicle may appear calm, but calm does not remove complexity. Every sudden stop, every shift in direction, every crowded movement around him asks for constant adaptation. What others manage automatically through sight must be handled through memory, balance, listening, and trust. People who choose this option often respond strongly to long-term challenge rather than momentary strain. You may naturally think beyond the single scene in front of you. Instead of asking only who needs relief right now, part of your mind may quietly notice who carries adaptation into every ordinary task, every public space, every unfamiliar moment. That does not mean you rank one struggle above another. It may simply mean your attention is drawn toward what is constant rather than temporary. This instinct often appears in people who are sensitive to invisible effort. You may notice when someone seems composed but is clearly navigating conditions that others rarely think about. In many situations, you may feel moved by the fact that certain people must develop strength simply to participate in spaces that others move through without reflection. There is often a justice-oriented feeling inside this answer, not necessarily political, but moral in a personal sense. a quiet awareness that equal treatment does not always mean identical treatment. Some people drawn to this choice instinctively respond to overlooked vulnerability. If everyone immediately notices the obvious need elsewhere, your attention may shift toward the person whose difficulty risks being underestimated simply because it is handled with dignity. That kind of perception often reflects emotional depth. You may think often about what daily life costs people internally, even when they do not ask for sympathy. You may be especially aware of environments, systems, or habits that unintentionally favor some people while making ordinary tasks harder for others. This can become a profound strength because it allows compassion to extend beyond what is immediately dramatic. But it can also carry a challenge. People who feel deeply for long-term or systemic difficulty sometimes carry emotional weight that others do not fully see. You may notice unfairness often enough that ordinary situations feel heavier than they appear to people around you. At times, you may also feel frustration when others react only to visible urgency while overlooking subtler barriers. Still, this instinct usually reflects something thoughtful: the ability to sense that independence does not erase vulnerability. A person who navigates difficulty with skill may still deserve ease when ease can be offered. And in many parts of life, this same pattern may appear again. You may naturally think about accessibility, inclusion, quiet dignity, and whether everyone present is able to participate equally, even when no one else has mentioned it yet. Sometimes your choice suggests that what reaches you most deeply is not what appears weakest, but what continues with quiet strength in conditions that remain demanding every day. And that kind of attention often reveals a compassion that listens beneath appearances. What makes this kind of exercise interesting is not that one answer uncovers a fixed identity, but that each answer highlights which human signal your attention trusted first when several meaningful signals appeared at once. In reality, most people can understand every option. That is why the choice can feel unexpectedly difficult. The mind does not usually struggle because compassion is absent. It struggles because compassion is being pulled in more than one direction at the same time. One person may represent visible effort. Another may represent age and fragility. Another may suggest responsibility for someone else. Another may reflect a challenge that extends far beyond the moment. And because all of those forms of need are real, your instinct often reveals not what you reject, but what your inner priorities organize first when time is limited. That priority is shaped by many quiet influences: family values, lived experience, personal memories, cultural habits, moments of loss, people you have cared for, or even struggles you have witnessed without fully realizing how deeply they stayed with you. Sometimes people are surprised by how quickly they defend their own answer once they choose. That defense can be just as revealing as the choice itself, because often the explanation carries deeper beliefs about fairness, responsibility, dignity, or protection. But what matters most is remembering that instinct is only the beginning, not the whole picture. A first response may reveal one pattern, while reflection reveals another. Some people choose quickly, then immediately feel drawn toward the needs of the others too. That tension is not confusion. It often means your empathy is flexible enough to hold several truths at once. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden inside simple choices: not discovering which answer is correct, but noticing how many values can coexist inside one ordinary moment. Sometimes the most revealing part is not who you chose. It is understanding why that choice felt natural before words arrived. A single seat on a moving bus may seem too small to matter, yet moments like this often remind us that everyday choices quietly reflect the way we meet the world. Not perfectly, not completely, but often honestly. Your answer today does not place you inside a fixed category, and it does not define your character forever. It simply offers one small glimpse of what your attention protects first when several kinds of need appear together. Sometimes that awareness is valuable on its own. Because once you notice your instinct, you begin noticing it elsewhere too. In conversations, in relationships, in conflict, in the way you respond when people around you need something different at the same time. So now I'm curious. Which person did you choose first, and what was the reason your mind gave before you had time to rethink it? Write your answer in the comments, and if you want, also mention whether another option almost pulled your attention too. Sometimes the second answer tells an equally interesting story.